All right. Good afternoon. My name is Marco, and today I'm happy to talk about ReActionView. I've been an open source contributor and full stack developer using Rails for a long time, and I love open source. I've been on the core team for Stimulus, Reflex, and Cable Ready, which are similar concepts to what Hotwire is doing today. And I've been on the maintainer team for Stimulus over the past few years. I really love Ruby, and I really love Rails. So I want to keep it as attractive as possible for people to join our community. I've been doing Hotwire for a few years now too. I've been teaching at boot camps, have been mentoring early career engineers, and also have been helping businesses adopting Hotwire in production. But a lot of people have noticed that there's a lack of tooling, and lack of tooling for the view layer in general. A few years ago at Rails World 2023, I introduced Stimulus LSP. If you're not familiar, Stimulus LSP gives you the option to see the stimulus controller that are not registered in your application. It also helps you with autocomplete when you have the stimulus actions and the controller and actions and so on. The problem was this was HTML only. There was no ERB support. And for Rails apps, it's quite common to use ActionView tag helper. So you might have code in HTML that looks like this here, where you have all the different attributes that Stimulus expects. But in the most extreme case, you could have an application like this, where you have the tag helpers from ActionView. The problem here is we didn't have any tooling support at all for these kinds of documents. At Rails World 2 years ago, I had this slide up, and on that slide we had a section where it said we want to have better tooling as soon as the Ruby LSP itself gets better support for ERB. With this and a few other cases, I had a few use cases where I was like, I want to have a better ERB parser. So I wanted to tackle the bigger picture. That's what I'm here to share today. Earlier at RubyKaigi this year, I introduced HERB, a new ERB parser, HTML+ERB parser. At RailsConf, I introduced new tooling support for this built on top of the ERB parser, for linting, auto-formatting, language servers, and more. And today here at RubyKaigi on Rails, I want to talk about rendering ERB. To recap from RubyKaigi, this is where I introduced HERB. HERB is an ecosystem of tools specifically built for HTML+ERB files. Initially, it was a parser, formatter, and linter. But as I was building out these tools, more and more kind of kept coming, and this is now the full ecosystem of tools that we have for HERB. The most important piece is the parser. And as I was showing at RubyKaigi, to recap here, it's an HTML-aware ERB parser. It's written in C. It's built on Prism parser for parsing the Ruby pieces in that document. It's designed for tooling, and it supports the ActionView tag helpers. What it gives you back is a syntax tree for HTML and Ruby in one. So we have structural awareness of these HTML+ERB files. I like to show it in this example here, where you have a if condition. What previous parsers were seeing is you have a Ruby piece or ERB piece, you have some text, and you have a Ruby piece again. But what these parsers wouldn't know is that the if at the top belongs to the end and kind of closes together. So what HERB does, it gives you a tree where you have the top part, where you have the bottom part, and this kind of encloses the tag that are within them. So within that, you have the HTML tag, and this closes the whole thing. So you have the full understanding of these documents as they are in your files. This is what I showed at RubyKaigi. It is supported in Ruby. It has WebAssembly bindings. It has bindings for Node.js and JavaScript, and a lot more. At RailsConf, I was showing the potential that we have to build a better view layer for Rails. And I was talking about HTML+ERB templating, and I showed the vision for how this could look like in Rails. Rails itself doesn't come without its issues when it comes to the view layer. So you might have problems with encapsulation. You have testing problems, you have performance-related issues, there's lack of tooling. And I kind of want to show here what we were able to do with this. So I want to focus on developer tooling. So we have a formatter now, a HERB formatter. The idea here is that you can automatically format your HTML-ERB documents. So you give it a string of HTML-ERB, you save your file, or you run the CLI, and it will give you a formatted document back. This works also in the editor, so you save it, and it will just kind of format as you would expect. Similarly, we have built the linter, and the linter gives you some feedback on your HTML documents on ERB to show you some code mistakes that you might have. And recently, we also shipped some new, rules where we also analyze the ERB control flow. So in this case, you might be able to see that we have duplicate IDs in the document. It also comes with a nice CLI, so you see all the offenses in the CLI with beautiful highlighted syntax highlighting. And since RailsConf, we shipped 18 new lint rules, 9 of which are focused on accessibility, so we can have more accessible tools, views. So it's a total of 32 new lint rules, and we have more to kind of work into this. Similarly, we have been working on stimulus lint. The stimulus LSP supported all of these actions or diagnostics, but they were locked into the LSP itself. Stimulus lint now is able to extract that, so we can run these independently of the LSP. And it's using the stimulus parser project to kind of analyze your application and your stimulus controls. And now, thanks to HERB, we can also ship a new update for the stimulus LSP, where we are able to give these diagnostics on these kind of syntax here too. We also want to explore what we can do for Turbo, if there's similar things you can annotate and kind of give you diagnostics for. Another common thing in HTML-ERB documents is, or in JavaScript ecosystem, is the Tailwind utility to format these utility classes. We have been working on one for HTML-ERB too, and you can give a class, save the file, and it will automatically kind of format the classes as you would expect. Since this is using HERB, it also supports the ERB syntax here too, so you have this kind of back and forth between these syntaxes. This is coming very soon. It's not quite ready to ship yet, but we are hoping to release this as well. And then finally, we were talking about the ERB rendering engine to kind of get the current string template engine and turn it into a HTML templating engine. What it means is that we want to have an engine that cannot produce invalid HTML. In traditional ERB today, if you have this document here, which has a missing H1 tag at the end, and you give this to ActionView and tell it to compile this, it will kind of compile this template as you would expect, and will just give you the compile templates. What we could do with HERB now is to say we might be able to do the same thing. We have a missing closing tag here too, and when we are trying to compile this using the HERB handler, potentially, it will crash and tell you there's a missing closing tag. And that was the idea that I shared at RailsConf to what we could do with this now. So I'm here today to now show you how this actually works in practice. To kind of go back a little bit, the Rails view layer is typically made up of ActionView. ActionView shipped in July 2004 in Rails 05. And back then, it was still part of this whole MVC, what Rails stands for. And back then also, it was kind of Action Pack, which had controls and views kind of together in one package. But even then, it was using ERB, which, if you don't know, stands for Embedded Ruby. But it was still templates and plain text files and have sprinkles of Ruby embeddings. Today, ActionView ships with eRuby as the rendering engine. And as we know, ERB is here to stay. Rails is not going to change that. ActionView is here to stay. So let's see how we can level up ActionView by keeping it Railsy. So I want to kind of take a look at how we can take ActionView and reimagine how some of the things work, how we can re-engineer some of the things to make them more modern, And maybe also see if you can make reactive templates, kind of like Phoenix LiveView does. And that's the idea for ReActionView. An initiative to explore what's possible in the Rails view layer today and beyond. The design goals are that we want to keep this backwards compatible. We want to improve developer experience. We want to embrace web standards as the browsers are getting more and more advanced. And just to see what's possible, what we can do more. Over the last few years, we saw a lot of advancements in the browsers, like import maps, web components, decorative shadow DOMs, PWAs, and so much more. In CSS, we got container queries, CSS nesting, and now even functions. In web APIs, we got the view transition APIs, the popovers, and now even more recently the invoke commands API, which are super powerful. Traditionally, in server-side rendering on the left side, we have a Rails app with HTML over the wire and some kind of JavaScript framework. And on kind of the other side, we have client-side rendering with a Rails API and some traditional single-page application with ReActivView and so on. But these are two extremes. There's nothing like in the middle that really bridges that. There is in Russia.js, which is getting close, but it's still pretty much opt-in and like super specific. So people want to have high-fidelity UIs. They want to reuse existing component libraries, or they have kind of split up teams and already have a lot of React engineers. And Hotwire is great. It's simple and gets the job done most of the cases. But if you start with Hotwire today and want to transition to something more advanced, there's no on-ramp. It's not easy to go from one side to the other. And that's why a lot of teams today start to use single-page applications from the beginning, which is giving MA so much what makes Rails so productive and great. So let's see if we can close this gap and make this better for us Rails engineers. And I want to see what's possible. So we have a new HERB release, 07, and this ships with a HERB engine. It's a new HTML-aware rendering engine, and it's trying to be ERB API compatible. So let's compare them. ERB engine, if you give it this template here, which has this time a closing tag, it uses a regex and splits up the dynamic pieces and the static pieces. It calls add text or add expression for each of those, if it's dynamic or static. And it compiles to this template here, where you have a string, a buffer, you shuffle in the static strings or the output of this Ruby expression. If you compare this to HERB engine and we give it the same templates, what we can do now is you can use the HERB parser to parse this file, and we get back a syntax tree. I will compact this a little bit so you can read it. So we have a document, we have an element node outside of it, we have an opening tag, we have text nodes, ERB content, and a closing tag node. HERB supports visitors, so we can kind of visit this template now and go strategically about visiting each of these elements or these nodes. And if we implement each of them, we can compile these templates. So let's start with the HTML element node. This holds the references to the open tag, to the body, and the closing tag. So we just visit each of those. And then in the open tag node, we can see on the right side, we have these single tokens. And we can just call add text for each of them to kind of compile this template. For the text node, we can do the same. We can call add text for just the content. And more interestingly, for the Ruby, or the ERB part, we can check if it's a output tag, and then call add expression to give, like, add the outputs, or add code for if and control structure that don't need an output. And what we end up is kind of this sequence of calls to these functions. And if you compare this with ERB engine, you can see on the right side this is longer and kind of it's more verbose. But what we can do now is we can re-implement these functions to kind of collect these tokens, and then we get something like this here. And as you can see, there's a bunch of text tokens at the start, a bunch of text tokens at the end, and we can try to compact them so we just end up with a single string for each of those. And if we now call add text or add expression for each of them, we pretty much end up with the same output for both engines. And then similarly, if we compare the output of the compiled output here, it's the same as well. So if we implement all nodes the syntax tree has, we end up with almost the exact same output for the compiled templates. So let's change Rails to use this new Herb engine. ActionView template makes this really easy for us. We can change this line from eRuby to Herb engine because it's API compatible. And in the ERB handler, we can go in and add a autoload for the Herb and change the implementation from eRuby to Herb as well. And if you start our application now in Rails, we get a running Rails application rendering using Herb engine, which is super exciting. The cool thing is that it guarantees all the stuff that the Herb parser is giving us. It ensures valid HTML syntax and valid ERB, and it turns it from being a string engine to a template, HTML templating engine. But it can also give us valuable feedback. In our editor, we see right away that something is wrong about the templates. The tooling in our editor is using the same parser and the same tooling that we're using for rendering the templates, which makes the tooling a lot more accurate and instant. And since we have full understanding and introspection of these templates now, we can do a lot of cool things. So let's improve error messages in Rails. If you have an invalid template, you get this blob of text and it gives you the whole template. So it's super hard to see what's wrong about it. But luckily for us, the Herb parser already knows where something is wrong. It can pinpoint it exactly. We already do this in the CLI to say we have a missing tag here. So let's take this from the CLI and bring it to the browser. So when you have a template error, you see it in the browser as well. Since we have HTML+ERB, we can do HTML validations. So if we have nested p tags, which are invalid HTML, we can have a warning. And the cool thing about these warnings, you can dismiss them and you go back to the app. So it's just telling you something is wrong, but it doesn't stop you from just looking at the output. The other cool feature about ActionView is this config flag you can set in your application. And it will give you these comments at the top and the bottom that's begin and end of the templates. The problem is that you cannot really style HTML comments with CSS. But our compiler already knows how to render HTML at elements and attributes. So what if we inject HTML attributes in our engine instead of adding these comments? So we add these data attributes with the file names and a little bit of CSS, and then we get these beautiful outlines in our browser to tell us where the templates are. We can do this for views, partials, components, have an extra attribute for the type, and then what we have in our browser here is different colors for the different partial types or the view types. We can add a relative path from the project. So when you hover over these labels, it will give you the path in the application. And then finally, if we give it the full path on our system, if you go into the browser and click on it, it will open it in your editor. So you have to see back and forth. Since we're using CSS outlines and HTML attributes, it doesn't change the flow of the document at all, but it provides immensely helpful visual debugging. The jump to source and the clicking view, like the out labels, are really helpful, but we can do even better than that. So what if we kind of try to do this for ERB output tags? Can we do this? And you know the answer is yes. So we have this toggle here to enable these output tags. I will zoom in. And it will tell you which pieces on the page are dynamic. And if you enable this other option here for saying I want to, on hover, reveal the output tag, you get the actual ERB that rendered this part of into the browser. And as you can see, it works for pretty much all the elements on the page, and it tries to just be as styling-wise similar to the original. And yes, we can also do the same with jump to source here. So if you click on these output tags, it will bring you to the right file, the right line, and the right column in your editor. And then funny enough, if you say, I want to enable it for all, it gives you this output here. So what is next? At RailsConf, I shared we have 6 adoption levels for ReActionView. And today, we implement these first 2 levels. And what you can do in your Rails app today, you can run bundle add ReActionView, and then Rails generate ReActionView install, which will give you this initializer, and you can say intercept ERB true for enabling all HTML-ERB files. And if you start your application, you will get this debug tools right built in. This is just the beginning, and I want to kind of call to here that you just try it in your application, see if it works, and if it doesn't work, please open an issue. Then for the final few levels, we can look into this, what we can do here too. ActionView can have more optimizations now that we have all this introspection. So we might be able to do inlining of the partial render calls. We might be able to refactor these ActionView tag helpers to actual static attributes or static content. We might be able to minify the white space since we know where it's relevant and where it's not. And there's probably a lot more we can do, but that needs more exploration. The other thing we can look at is these reactive ERB views, similar to how Phoenix LiveView does this. So if you have this template up there, and you have some kind of state that you have to declare somehow, and if something changed about the state, it knows how to re-render your view, and then only re-render the pieces that are relevant for the state change. It's probably possible. I'm not sure if it's really viable, but it's something to explore that we can do. The other thing is client-side templates. If we say we limit the set of ERB we can use, we might be able to go what's reacted the other way around, to go from the client to the server, go from the server to the client, and then have ERB client components, which could transpile to web components, React components, or whatever, which would help with optimistic UI updates or even improved offline functionality using service workers or similar. And then finally, just say we have external components. So when you want to do more and don't want to abandon ActionView altogether, only on certain pages you can use these components. The idea here is that you can do it similar to import map Rails, where you have all these pins that you can say, please import these components from this package you might have, or import all components from this folder in my app. And then within your views, you can just use these React components or whatever you have in the ERB files. The engine would know how these components are kind of built, how you have to hydrate them, how you have to mount them, and so on. With the difference, it's tightly integrated. It has all the tooling, doesn't need any setup, and just works out of the box. There are more ideas to explore. One thing is, often with stimulus controllers, people say, I want to use it exactly once in my application. And then people say, use Alpine.js. But me personally, I don't really like this JavaScript in my HTML attributes, so it feels wrong. So I was thinking maybe we can do something like inline stimulus, similar to how Svelte does this, where you have a script tag in your view file, and then you can control the state, you can do reactive updates right in your ERB file, and it's just scoped to this one file. The other thing that's interesting is like view file scoped CSS. Similar to how Vue.js does this, you have a style scoped tag. And whenever you compile these templates, what the compiler does is it adds a data attribute to the elements, and then also scopes all your CSS rules. And then it just scopes to this one file and doesn't leak into your whole application. The other thing we can look at is selective rendering, which might be super useful for turbo frames. If you have a full document like this, and you say, I want to re-render this turbo frame, you only want to re-render this piece here. But maybe you can tell the render call, I only want to render the reviews ID, and then it knows to just render this piece of this whole template. But the idea here is just to bring more of these modern JavaScript features back to Rails so we can be more prepared for the future. and that you don't have to abandon the Rails way of doing views. The good thing is ActionView has been really stable. Most features were additive and weren't breaking, which makes it super easy to build on and rely on. Rails shouldn't disencourage the use of modern JavaScript. Quite the opposite, it should embrace it, and also embrace modern web standards. Rails has been really good with providing built-in defaults that are super good, and you need the same kind of defaults for the view layer too. So the view layer itself scales the same way as everything else in the framework does. If you look at active records, you can have sharding, you can have multi-tenancy, you have all these built-in features which help you scale, but the view layer was pretty much left out in this whole scaling package. But it's important to me to say this is a vision. It's not quite reality yet, but I think it shows that this is where we could go. If we as a framework and community want to keep relevant, we need to explore what's possible, and these new innovations require exploration. Even if none of this is viable in production or viable in our apps, it's still worth exploring. And just the tooling that get out of this already with the format and the linter is already worth it. So to conclude, the Prism parser, or just the project in general to have a unified parser, helped in a big way on the Ruby internals and its tooling landscape. And HERB can have a similar effect for HTML templating tooling. HERB started as a parser and is already a valuable ecosystem of tools today. And ReActionView started as a vision to address some of the shortcomings in the Rails view layer. Today, it might just be an alternative rendering engine, but I believe that this shows what is possible in the future. We can push more boundaries and bring the whole Rails framework forward. So we can kind of hold up with the current JavaScript stacks and don't have to write JavaScript. But also that teams don't have to abandon the beauty of ActionView and server-side rendering. The community has already built a credible tooling for Ruby itself, and now it's time to bring the same care to the view layer. With HERB and ReActionView, I believe we have a path forward to make this happen. In the end, I love Ruby, and that's why I'm here today. And I believe that the HERB engine can help the Rails framework come forward. Rails has a really unique position as a full-stack framework since it has really good backends, but also a good front-end story, but we can do it even better. I want to keep Rails as attractive as possible for all of us to use. I want to thank these people that have helped to come here today, that we are where we are today, and all the contributors that have contributed to the HERB project. And finally, I also want to thank all my GitHub sponsors that have been supporting me over the past few years. So please give HERB a star on GitHub, or check out the box on herb-tools.dev, and do the same for ReActionView, which is available on reactionview.dev as well. Please give the tools a try, offer feedback, and report issues. And that's what I have for here today. We have been talking about this new HERB engine, which is an HTML-aware ERB rendering engine. We have the HERB updates with more tooling. We have the view outlines, we have stimulus lint, we have the ERB outlined outlines, and so much more. I believe there's a bright future for the Rails frontend story, and that's all I have for today. Thank you so much.